The HOA cut my 100-year-old oak tree in half while I was at my father's funeral. And it backfired so spectacularly that now it's the hottest photo spot in the county. That tree was planted by my great-grandfather with his own hands in 1923. For generations of family photos were taken under those branches. The day I'm burying my dad, the HOA president decides it's the perfect time to chainsaw it down the middle like she's splitting firewood. I pull into my driveway that evening, emotionally destroyed, and there she is, pristine Cartwright, standing next to what's left of my family's legacy with a satisfied smirk and a clipboard full of emergency work orders. The tree looks like someone took a sword to it. Half standing, half gone, completely surreal. But here's the thing about destroying something beautiful out of spite. Sometimes it just makes people notice how ugly you really are. I'm Derek Holbrook, 52 years old, electrician, third generation to live in the same house my grandmother bought back, when this was still cotton fields and good intentions. It's a 1947 Craftsman with wide porches and built-in everything, where the morning light used to filter through 100-year-old oak leaves onto my kitchen table. The whole place smells like sawdust and strong coffee, scents that soak into your soul after 75 years. That oak outside my window, my great-grandfather planted it when he got back from the trenches in France. He said he needed something beautiful to look at after seeing too much ugly. Every major family moment happened under those branches. First steps, graduation photos, my wedding picture from back when I still believed in forever. When Dad got sick, he'd sit under that tree every morning with his coffee, watching the sunrise through the leaves. 2 months of watching cancer eat away at the strongest man I knew. The divorce papers came 3 weeks before his diagnosis. Apparently, my wife couldn't handle in sickness and in health when it got too real. So that house, that tree, they weren't just property anymore. They were my last connection to everything that mattered. 15 years ago, developers showed up like locusts in suits and turned the farmland into Willowbrook estates, because nothing says classy suburb like naming it after trees you cut down to build it. They threw up McMansions around my grandmother's place, then decided we all needed an HOA to protect property values. My house got grandfathered in with voluntary compliance, which is like saying a root canal is voluntary if you enjoy screaming. Then Christine Cartwright moved here from California 6 years ago, ran for HOA president like she was campaigning for world dictator. Real estate agent, naturally. Lives in the biggest house on the cul-de-sac, 4,800 square feet of beige perfection where even the doormat looks like it went to Harvard. The sound of her manicured nails clicking against that clipboard became the neighborhood's unofficial warning siren. The harassment started small. My grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Apparently, there's a difference between midnight and obsidian that only someone with too much time and too little purpose could detect. My work truck violated the commercial vehicle clause buried deeper in the handbook than Jimmy Hoffa. But the tree became her obsession. She claimed the branches hung 2 inches into the neighbor's airspace. 2 inches, like she was negotiating international borders instead of suburban property lines. I'd had it professionally trimmed 6 months earlier, but Pristine measured it herself with a tape measure and the dedication of a forensic investigator. She took photos from 17 different angles like she was documenting a crime scene. The morning of Dad's funeral, I left at dawn for the service 2 hours away. I gave Mrs. Olivia, my 83-year-old neighbor, sharp as a tack and better at surveillance than the NSA, my spare key. The funeral was everything you'd expect. A stranger reading generic platitudes while my brother and I tried to hold it together in scratchy suits that smelled like mothballs. I got home just as the desert sun was painting everything gold. My tires crunched on gravel that suddenly sounded too loud in the evening quiet. That's when I saw it. My tree. 4 generations of family history. Chainsawed in half like some demented art project. Not removed, not trimmed, surgically bisected, leaving this impossible sculpture that looked like Mother Nature having a nervous breakdown. Pristine stood there in her perfect blazer, directing a cleanup crew with her tablet, while the smell of fresh sawdust mixed with diesel exhaust hung in the air like evidence of a crime. She waved an emergency work order at me, claiming imminent danger to the neighborhood. I stood there in my funeral clothes, staring at my murdered family tree, while neighbors gathered like rubberneckers at a car wreck. 3 neighbors had called about dangerous widowmaker branches. She announced loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. The HOA has emergency powers to protect the community from imminent threats. Imminent threats, right? And I'm the Easter Bunny. I demanded to see the complaints. Privacy concerns, she chirped, clutching her tablet like it contained nuclear codes. But she couldn't resist showing off. Photos with timestamps, measurements down to the millimeter, contractor estimates. The woman had turned tree murder into a forensic investigation. This tree was professionally trimmed 6 months ago, I said, pulling out my phone to show the arborist certification. Licensed, bonded, the whole 9 yards. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-throated cackle. That's adorable, Derek. Sue us. The HOA has a legal fund that could buy your little house twice over. While she gloated, neighbors started pulling out their phones, not just to gawk, but to share. The half-tree spread across social media faster than gossip at a church potluck. Some people actually loved it, called it suburban art, accidentally profound. It looked like something Dolly would dream up during a fever. And apparently that was Instagram gold. That night, I researched HOA law until my eyes felt like sandpaper. My dad had been a union electrician. He taught me that knowledge is the only tool management can't confiscate. Turns out emergency powers aren't quite as emergency as dictators like to pretend. Notification requirements, proper procedures, documentation timelines. I found the key. HOA emergency powers require 72-hour written notification for any non-life-threatening work. The only exception is if someone's literally about to die in the next 10 minutes. A tree that survived the Great Depression doesn't suddenly become lethal on funeral day. The next morning, I called the HOA's lawyer. Voicemail. Called again. More voicemail. Then Mrs. Olivia shuffled over with news that made my coffee taste like Christmas morning. She'd seen Pristine measuring my tree at 7 a.m. the day of Dad's funeral, 3 hours before any emergency work order existed, 7 hours before the chainsaw started. She had that little tape measure out there like she was planning a bank robbery. Took pictures from every angle. That woman planned this whole thing like D-Day. But Mrs. Olivia has professional security cameras, the kind that record everything in crystal clear detail, because she got tired of porch pirates stealing her arthritis medication. Those cameras caught Pristine red-handed, measuring and photographing my tree hours before filing any paperwork. Emergency, my wrinkled behind, she muttered, handing me a USB drive that felt like solid gold. The footage was beautiful. Timestamp 7:03 a.m. Pristine measuring away. Emergency work order filed at 2:17 p.m. Work began at 11:30 a.m. The math didn't lie. You can't file emergency paperwork after you've already started the emergency work. Meanwhile, the half-tree kept drawing crowds. Professional photographers showed up with gear that cost more than my truck. Coffee shops started advertising half-tree lattes and surreal Sunday specials. The local newspaper ran a human interest story about accidental suburban art. Pristine doubled down, telling anyone with a microphone that the tree's fame proved it was a dangerous distraction and a liability nightmare. In her twisted logic, people wanted to photograph something beautiful meant it needed to be completely destroyed. But she miscalculated. The internet has a long memory and zero patience for petty tyrants. Every HOA horror story in the county started getting shared alongside photos of my tree. People shared their own Pristine encounters. The family she harassed for parking their wheelchair van in their own driveway. The veteran she cited for flying an American flag, supposedly 2 inches too large. 3 days later, my mailbox delivered a special gift. Legal papers thick enough to choke a horse. The HOA's attorney had crafted a cease and desist letter threatening harassment and defamation of character. Character defamation from a woman who murders trees during funerals. The irony could have powered the neighborhood for a week. She also hit me with violations. My work truck, my mailbox color, weekend garage projects, each with escalating daily fines. Her brilliant plan hit a pothole the size of Texas. My butcher tree had become a genuine tourist attraction. Tour buses started showing up. The local visitors bureau added it to their quirky Arizona attractions list. The smell of diesel exhaust from idling buses mixed with desert heat and sunscreen became our permanent atmosphere. One neighbor started charging tourists $5 to use her bathroom and made more money than most side hustles. Kids set up lemonade stands that could have funded a small country. Pristine called code enforcement about my unauthorized commercial venture. Never mind that I wasn't charging anyone or had any control over the visitors. Then Mrs. Olivia discovered something beautiful. Pristine's brother-in-law owned a landscaping company that butchered my tree. $3,200 for half a day's work. No competitive bids, no board approval, just Pristine writing checks to family. Emergency expenditures over $500 require board approval and competitive bidding. Always. No exceptions. I called my lawyer friend Jake Morrison. He'd already heard about the tree through legal gossip networks. Apparently, chainsawing heritage trees during funerals creates quite the buzz in attorney circles. She paid her brother-in-law $3,200 without board approval. That's not just a procedural violation. That's potential embezzlement. While I built my case, Pristine launched a character assassination campaign. Anonymous complaints about my electrical work started appearing at job sites. Safety inspections happened every time I posted updates about the tree. Whispered rumors that I was unstable since Dad's death, using grief as an excuse to harass innocent board members. Anonymous notes showed up under windshield wipers, through my mail slot, taped to my front door. Drop the lawsuit or things get worse. Trees aren't the only things that get cut down. Then Channel 7 ran an investigative piece called HOA Overreach, When Tree Trimming Goes Too Far. Pristine couldn't resist the spotlight. On camera, she called my father's funeral an unfortunate coincidence and a personal scheduling conflict. That night, the comment section lit up like the 4th of July. None of it was friendly to Christine. The morning after her television disaster, she called an emergency HOA board meeting to declare my tree an ongoing public nuisance and authorize complete removal. The meeting room filled like a prize fight. She brought a professional landscaper to testify about structural instability, had documentation about property values and tourist traffic, even produced a petition with 37 signatures. But I've been busy too. That morning, I'd pulled the original 1947 property deed from a county courthouse. It contained an environmental protection clause requiring preservation of significant mature trees. My oak was explicitly mentioned by the original surveyor as a heritage specimen estimated 100-plus years old, to be preserved in perpetuity. Jake drove down from Phoenix armed with copies of the deed and a briefcase full of precedents. Before the board voted, he stood up. This tree is protected under the original environmental covenant attached to this property. Any destruction requires city permits, environmental impact studies, and approval from the Historical Preservation Committee. The emergency cutting was performed without proper permits, violating city ordinances and state environmental laws. The contractor could face criminal charges. The HOA violated its own financial procedures by awarding a no-bid contract worth $3,200 to a board member's relative. That's potential embezzlement under state law. The room went quiet. Then someone started slow clapping. Within seconds, half the room was applauding while Pristine sat there looking like she'd been hit by a freight train carrying legal documents. The vote was postponed indefinitely. 3 board members quietly resigned during the recess. 3 days later, Jake's team finished their deep dive into the HOA's financial records. Your tree wasn't random revenge, he said over the phone. It was a desperate cover-up. The original 1987 Neighborhood Development Agreement contained an environmental protection clause that made my property essentially untouchable. Any significant mature tree over 50 years old was protected by county ordinance. The oak was named in the surveyor's report as a heritage specimen requiring perpetual preservation. Pristine had known for months. The HOA's insurance company had flagged the environmental liability during their annual policy review. Any damage to protected flora could result in criminal charges and civil penalties up to $50,000. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was eliminating evidence before the insurance audit discovered her embezzlement. $47,000 in no-bid contracts over 3 years to companies owned by her relatives, her brother-in-law's landscaping, her cousin's fence repair, even her unemployed nephew's fake consulting firm. My tree was supposed to be destroyed before anyone could prove it was protected, erasing the liability that would trigger a full financial investigation. Mrs. Olivia provided the final piece. Security footage showing Pristine meeting the landscaping crew 2 weeks before Dad's funeral, handing over cash payments, no official documentation. The insurance company's preliminary audit had already identified irregularities. Christine's real estate license was under review. Her husband had quietly filed for divorce. Everything made sense. The harassment wasn't about mailbox colors or grass height. It was about driving me out before I discovered the environmental protections. The emergency cutting wasn't spite. It was evidence destruction. The anonymous threats weren't intimidation. They were panic. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, destruction of protected property, filing false emergency reports. Civil lawsuit for property damage, punitive damages, emotional distress, legal fees, conservative estimate $75,000 before pain and suffering. Her insurance company would hang her out to dry because embezzlement voids coverage. Pristine's support network crumbled. Board members resigned to avoid liability. Her landscaper expert hired his own attorney and cooperated. Her brother-in-law threw her under the bus. The FBI showed up with search warrants for financial records. Using HOA funds to pay fake contractors can qualify as mail fraud. Her final gambit was calling an emergency meeting to declare the HOA bankrupt and dissolve the board, hoping to transfer assets to a shell company before seizure. Word spread fast. The parking lot looked like a political rally with news vans. Inside, Pristine looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Due to mounting legal costs and frivolous lawsuits, she announced, the board has no choice but to declare bankruptcy and dissolve this HOA. Jake stood up from the back row. Before this board takes any action, I have some documents that might interest everyone. He walked to the front. Mrs. Cartwright, you're served. Criminal charges, civil lawsuit for damages exceeding $75,000, federal investigation into mail fraud and racketeering. Any attempt to dissolve the HOA while under federal investigation constitutes obstruction of justice. I've already filed injunctions. Detective Rodriguez approached with handcuffs. Pristine Cartwright, you're under arrest for embezzlement of public funds, filing false emergency reports, and destruction of protected environmental resources. The sound of those cuffs clicking shut was sweeter than church bells on Christmas morning. The room erupted in applause. Outside, reporters swarmed. When one asked what I learned, I said, bullies rely on good people staying quiet. The moment you shine a light on their behavior, they scatter like roaches when you turn on the kitchen light. 6 months later, the half-tree had become the most famous tourist attraction in 3 counties, complete with historical markers and a small gift shop whose proceeds went to tree preservation. Pristine pleaded guilty, got 18 months in federal prison, full restitution of $67,000, permanent revocation of her real estate license, and a lifetime ban from HOA boards. The HOA rewrote bylaws for transparency and competitive bidding. New board members ran on accountability. The tree got heritage designation, a protective buffer zone, and a small memorial park. Restoration turned it into a unique canopy, more artistic than nature originally planned, somehow more beautiful for having survived human cruelty. Local schools bring classes for field trips to teach history, environmental protection, and civic engagement. Kids learn early that some lessons are worth learning. The ripple effects went further. Jake used our precedents to win similar cases across the state. The legislature passed HOA reform laws requiring financial transparency and limiting emergency powers. My electrical business thrived, but more importantly, I found purpose again, speaking at conferences about homeowner rights, helping others fight when the system feels rigged. The annual Heritage Tree Festival became a celebration under that unique canopy. Music, art, picnics recreating generations of memories. For generations of family photos now include the half-tree as a symbol of resilience rather than loss. Dad would have loved the irony. His funeral becoming the catalyst for a fight that saved his grandfather's tree and exposed a criminal who'd been stealing from the community for years. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting bullies destroy themselves while you document the evidence.